Welcome to Between Authors. I am your host, author Adrian Lopez. What is it that excites us as a reader? It's finding that book or author that you may never have heard of, sort of like the treasure hunt as for a reader. The goal from my podcast is to bring to you those books or authors that you may never have found, but may be the treasure you've been hunting for all along. Today on episode 46, I bring you author Stephanie Fernandez. We're going to go over a little bit about who she is, what she's published, what she's working on, and maybe what her plans are for the future. Welcome to the show, Stephanie.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Happy to have you here today. Why don't you begin by giving an introduction to the viewers to you?
Cool. So, hi, my name's Stephanie. I reside in Queensland, Australia. So, I feel like Australian authors aren't really that out there. We're popular here, but we're not really that huge in the rest of the world. So, my goal is to eventually get to that status and have people in America, in UK, and other people know my name. Uh, But I am a mother and a stepmom as well. So I have two boys and I live with my husband, and we've been married for 10 years this year. And I live with my dog Hercules as well, which is a Maremma cross border collie. He's an old boy as well. He's turning 12 this year. And I work full time. So I work in e-commerce as a merchandising and trading specialist. So quite technical, which is different to I love creativity and creating. So it's a bit different. I live kind of two lives, but I write whenever I can because that's my absolute passion. So yeah, that's a bit about me.
Yeah, it's interesting because, the e-commerce side, I've done that too. I do that with furniture online.
Oh,
And
nice.
I don't know if you do the same, but I use a lot of the same techniques that we use for e-commerce. It's basically the
Hmm.
same thing for the algorithm for TikTok, Twitter, or any of this stuff, right? So you use a lot of the, interaction, making sure
Yes,
you're getting caught, whether it's a share, whether it's a comment, whether it's anything. All those
exactly.
interactions build you up in the algorithm. And as you mentioned, right now, Australian authors aren't really getting caught in the algorithm, right? They don't get yet.
Right.
Maybe on the TikTok side, on Australia, when all the internet, when it sees your location, you're probably catching more there. But on this side, you don't get caught, right? And that's
100%.
one of the things, I had sent to you that we do with the Latinx indie authors
Yes.
too, because a lot of Latin authors do not get caught again in the algorithm, right? And
Which I didn't
that's what we do.
realize.
We just share each other,
Yeah,
comment on each other's work and just try to get that interaction. So we start building up in the algorithm and you can be seen, right?
exactly.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's interesting too, because most of the indie authors, I would say the majority, probably 90 some percent, all have our day jobs, and then we do this whenever we can find the time, right? When you can squeeze in 20 minutes here, 10 minutes here, to try to get your writing in. Um, for
Yes.
me, I don't know about you, but for me, the hardest thing is the reading. There's never any time to be
Oh,
able to read anything, especially when you're trying to
100%.
write, trying to edit. It's hard, right? It's difficult.
It's so difficult, and I find that, like, reading, sorry, for me is so important because it inspires me when I write. So when I read to also inspire myself and find new techniques and ways of doing things. So it's also kind of a research piece as well for me.
Yeah.
And also it's, a nice switch off to have the other side of things, not the writer side. But yes, there's so few hours in the day, and like you said, I'm already trying to squeeze in writing whenever I can.
Yeah.
And I used to have a job where it went through like quite serious lulls for months where there just wouldn't be any work and it'd just be in waves. And then I would, to make it look like I was being busy, I would write emails to myself, which were actually excerpts from my book. And I would send it to myself,
That's
make it
that's
look like
pretty
I'm doing
genius,
something.
actually.
Thank you. But yes, it actually, like, it helped me because I was able to do that kind of during the day, not just at night, and utilize that time that I had in my job. So Yeah, that helped, but you just have to find, like, yeah, little spaces in your day to try and implement some, because otherwise the day would just own you instead.
It's gone, right? It's just gone. And that's
Totally.
again, it goes back to, why I try to support all the indie authors, because
Mhm.
being one, I understand, you know, how limited amount of time you have. I understand you have to do all the marketing yourself. I understand
Yeah.
trying to get the eyes on your product, right? And that's is difficult. And all of this is a passion project for us because none of us are making enough money to pay for anything. So this is just something we absolutely love to do, and we really, it's something for our soul to be able to write and do these. So that's why I always try
Yes.
my best to support everybody because I understand how it works.
Yeah, like, people like you are just incredible, how you spotlight indie authors, like, truly bow down, because it's not easy when you're already trying to do that yourself and
Yeah,
you're supporting others. It's such good work, so thanks to you.
no,
Kudos.
I try. I mean, I do my best on that side. I have a side question for you because it's a good thing. I've talked a little bit about it before in the podcast, but not as much.
Mhm.
You know, as you work full time and I work full time, and again, it's difficult to find that time. Do you have any? Do you have a way that makes it easier for you when you do have that limited time to write? Have you found certain things that have helped you in that situation? When I got like
Mm,
40 minutes, so I need to take
yeah.
advantage of all 40 minutes. Is there anything that you use or something maybe you've learned over the period that helps you in that case?
I feel like I had to become quite strict with myself, because I just was not getting it done. So I'd be like, "Oh, I'm just so tired. I'm exhausted. I'm not feeling it tonight." I'd always have excuses, and then, time just slips away, and you just figure out that there's never going to really be a good time. And so it's like I had to start being like, okay, I'm going to write for at least 2 nights of the week. And even if I just write a sentence, it doesn't matter. It's just I've got to put something down onto the page just to keep progressing the story and keep my skills flowing. Because I don't know about you, but like, if I step away from my work for too long, I kind of go back and I'm like, where am I? Like, where was I? Like, you lose that pace, and that when you're not on a roll anymore. So I really try to, yeah, and just be kind to myself that, hey, it might not be the best thing I've ever written in the space of 40 minutes, but hey, I got 40 minutes in and I did
Yeah.
something this week.
Yeah, and that's what the self editing going back and going through it is for, right? You do clean that up.
That's
Um,
right,
do,
exactly.
do you find yourself do you write in chronological order? Do you find yourself being very organized in your writing, or do you kind of go as it comes to you, or as you think of a scene or a part?
So I am a total chronological order girl, so I need to write in order. I don't know what it is. I sometimes wish I could, because I know where I want to get to, and I know that, say, that big scene that I want to write, but I'm not there yet, and I just can't write that scene yet until I work out all the steps to get to that scene, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
So
no, it does.
while I wish I could, because it's all in my head, I need to do it properly for myself.
I,
Yep,
I'm the
chronological.
complete opposite. I do the
Really?
same thing. I see it all. It's all kind of organized in my head.
Yep.
Um, so that's and I can't say it's a technique to share because I don't know if other people can do it that way. But a lot of times, when like I said, when you have 20 minutes, 15 minutes, it helps me because I do have it there, right? So it's me basically putting it on paper or putting it in the laptop. So I don't
Mm,
have to do 5, 10 minutes of saying, okay, what do I want to write? Luckily, I
yes.
just get there and I can just start going, yeah, you got to go back and piece them together and fix it.
Right.
But but at least it comes out, right? And if somebody
Exactly.
say, well, how do you do that? I have no idea. Right? It's just the way it kind of works. How do I say, okay, try this? It's not
Yeah,
something that's easily shared, right? But
this
yeah,
comes
it's
to
interesting. A lot of times, I like to ask the authors how they do cope with that because it's difficult, right? It is really difficult when you just don't have the time. And like you
Mm.
said, you have it in here, you know what you want to do, you know you want to get it out, you have maybe an internal deadline you've kind of made for yourself, and you're like, I'm just not going to hit this if I don't start doing some of this. But
Yeah,
it's difficult, right? It's a difficult thing to work through.
it really is. And if I get ideas, I'll quickly write them down in my notes app on my phone, or like if I think of a line of dialogue that I'm like, oh yeah, I really want that down the track, like I'll note it down. But yeah, as for writing like those big scenes, I just haven't figured out a way to do it yet and be good at piecing it all together. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
to
Yeah, I
me
mean,
that's
and
quite
honestly, the
scary.
honest truth is you go with what works for you, right? Whatever is comfortable for
Exactly.
you and what works, stick with it.
Yep.
Don't try to change it. Don't try to go
I
away from
shall.
it. And then you really start struggling, right? When you try to
Right.
switch that up, that makes it more difficult. Um, so we've learned a little more about you, right? And how you handle the work balance with writing, how you kind of go with your style and such. Why don't you get the viewers a little idea of your influences? What creatively influences you? And again, doesn't necessarily have to be authors and books.
Mhm. So mine is actually an author in a book.
Okay,
Typical
that's fine.
cliche. But Sarah J. Maas. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with her work, but she is a fantasy writer, and she was kind of my gateway into that new adult fantasy world. When I first read her stuff, I just thought, my God, she is so descriptive in her language that it was quite difficult for me to read because I'd only read like YA stuff and things that weren't fantasy before. So I'd never had that like world building before,
Yeah.
or that character driven narrative. So it was actually quite difficult for me to get into. But once I did, I found it really difficult to read anything else because I loved that depth that the fantasy book went into. And I just love the way that she weaves all her stories together and all the callbacks she does. Like, she's so clever with how she writes. And, she's young like me, and she's a mother. And so, like, just her success over the years and the fandom and just the work that she's put out there in the world is just phenomenal. Like, yeah, she's just totally what really started my writing journey and
Mhm.
why I love books so much, and especially the fantasy genre. So I definitely say she's like my number one influence, and her Throne of Glass series really set me off there. So,
Okay.
yep. Hmm.
And are you writing in the same genre? Is that the genre that you are writing in?
Yeah, it is. So I write fantasy romance. That's what my first book series is about. So I really found that I love that whole world building, that depth, like the descriptive nature that you talk, and the different like the challenge with the dialogue. Like, it's not like modern day dialogue, it's different, and
Yeah.
you really have to think before you write. Oh, is that actually like a human saying or an earthly saying, or does this make sense in this particular world? So yeah, it presents a challenge, but also it's so fun to write because it's like you create everything from scratch, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're creating this world. You're not basing it on Earth. You're not here. There's no mobile phones. There's no cameras. There's no those kinds of things. So yeah, it's a challenge, but it's also super fun at the same time.
Did you find yourself um, easily transitioning into writing in that style, or was it a process as you started going and just getting, as with anything, you just keep getting better with it as you go?
Mm. I kind of started dabbling in sci-fi more than fantasy at first. And while I really enjoy sci-fi, like I enjoy watching sci-fi, reading it, writing it, I just found with when I started going into fantasy, like I was saying, like there's such a freedom with it. And it just flowed so much more effortlessly for me than when I was trying to build my world within our already existing worlds. If
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it came quite easily to me because I do write quite descriptively, and I love all of the adjectives, and it fits me as a writer. So yeah, definitely wasn't as hard as I thought it would be.
Okay. So let's discuss your book. Why don't you let the viewers know the name of the book and kind of give us like a summary or a synopsis of what it's about?
Mhm. So my book is called The Palace of Crystal and Fire. So it's book one in a trilogy. So book two hopefully will be coming out this year, mid this year. So it is a fantasy romance, new adult novel, and it centers around Princess Allery, who lives in Malera. She is a half siren, half fae. So she's the only one of her kind. So she's quite different from the rest. She's always been the black sheep of her family. And then one day when she goes to visit the gate, which separates her lands from the warring territory over there called Mistreek, she's saved from the jaws of a really awful ancient beast from a stranger who is actually from Mistreek. And from there, she develops a relationship with this male, kind of an enemies to lovers type deal here. And then, after a case of mistaken identity, she is taken as prisoner to Mistreek and forced to hide her identity to survive there. And it's basically about her, trying to survive in a world that hates her kind, and not letting them know that she is in fact a royal. And it's a lot of deception and drama and tension and all of the good stuff. So that's my book.
Yeah, that sounds great. Why don't let's there's a couple of questions I usually like to ask. First one
Mhm.
being, do you have yourself a favorite scene in this book?
Oh, yes, it's not suitable for work. So it's a spicy scene. It's like where all the tension kind of snaps, and all of the emotions and everything come together in this one very heated scene. So I do. That's probably my number one. But another would be uh, my main character, Allery, when she is coming more into herself and she finally stands her ground, because she is someone who is more meek, timid, someone who does get walked over and doesn't speak up. So she's really come through a lot in the book, and just to see that kind of arc, that development
Yeah.
towards the end where a moment happens and she does end up standing her ground and she does take a stand and, shows how much she's grown. It was like a proud mum moment. It's like, oh, she's grown, she's there now. So it was a delight to write for me, because obviously I've crafted her journey there, and for her to finally get to that point was like really rewarding. So
Yeah.
proud mum moment.
On the opposite side of that, did you have a hard scene in the book?
Uh, yes. So I struggled with one of the characters who is, I guess, we'll call him the villain for now.
Mhm.
Um, he is someone that she gets bonded to. So basically, in this world, the Malayan Fae all have mates that are allocated to them, and they get bonded for life. And it's her mate that, isn't the nicest human being. And I find characters like that are difficult for me to write, because they're so far removed from any thought process that I would ever go through.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like I have to really try and put myself in those shoes to be like, okay, this isn't me, but what would this person do in this instance? And there's a particular scene where he manipulates her, and there's violence, and it was quite difficult for me to write, because as that's my character that it's happening to, and as a reader that would be quite harrowing. So yeah, it's because it's far removed from anything that would go through my head. So you have to quite remove yourself from that and write
Yeah.
as a villain. So yeah, that would probably be my hardest one that I had to do.
Yeah, I can see that. There was another author I had interviewed sometime last year, and I believe he had I think it was a murder mystery novel that he wrote, and there
Mm,
was a character in there that's just you know bad from
bad
every
news.
angle you can think of, and you know the a lot of the reviews and people, they loved the character, but they hated the character, right? Because of just how nasty this character was. And I'd
Hmm.
asked him that question, the character was popular, right? And he had said it was difficult to write. I said, it was popular.
Mm.
Would it ever come back? And he was flat out, he goes, I can never do that again. I just can't get
Wow.
in that mind space. He goes, it was the most difficult thing to get through. And I never want to go there again. So, but see, the interesting thing is though, for you on your character and how you wrote it, for him as well, those emotions that you feel as you're putting in there, that's what the reader is going to connect to, right? So if you're
Right.
feeling strong emotions, writing it and putting it down, they're going to get the strong emotions as well. And again, that's the beauty. That connection to the reader from your story is the beauty of this, right? What we do, putting that
So
story out
true.
for them. And
Mm.
when you have all those strong feelings going into it, they're definitely going to be able to feel that and sense that as they're reading it. And I always think, yeah, even when it's bad, right, I always just think it's a beautiful thing how that comes together and how that works.
Yes, I totally agree with you. And, I can think of books that I've read and I'm like, God, I hate this character with the passion of a thousand suns. But
Yeah,
like at the same time, it's like you want to evoke that reaction, right?
yeah,
That's the point of these characters. You want to evoke those kinds of emotions in the readers. And, when it's hard for us, it's obviously hard for the readers, but that's the point,
yeah,
right? Like you were saying.
yeah. That's the
Exactly.
connection, right? And that's the most
That's
important
right.
part of it.
Exactly.
Um, did you do so? This is world building, right? Fantasy world building. So technically, you're making a lot of it up because you're building it from scratch,
Mm.
right? You're like,
Hmm.
it's gonna look like this. This is what they eat. This is everything, right? From scratch.
Totally.
Did you do any specific research for it, for certain areas or certain things you wanted to write about?
I actually did a lot of research for this, mainly on two things. So, number one was language. So, like I was mentioning before, I didn't want to use any modern type language, any earthly type sayings or phrases or anything like that. And when it came to like the royal system, how there's dukes and there's lords and ladies and your majesty, your grace, like when are these terms used for whom? I really wanted to get that right. So
Yeah,
I did a lot of research on like royal structures. That was a big one, and royal phrasing as well, royal terminology. And then the second one, funnily enough, was actually fantasy clothing. So a lot of the time, we're just describing clothes as he's wearing pants with a shirt. But in a fantasy world, that kind of doesn't fit very well. So I would do so much research on the types of dresses, bodices, trousers, boots, what they're made of, things like that, doublets, collars, capes, cloaks, all of those things that like you don't really think of when you're reading just a book set here or something else. But for that, it doesn't fit if you just use like regular everyday clothing.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, there were the two things: language, like the royalty stuff, and fantasy clothing. Had to get that right.
Yeah, I mean it's crazy when you think about it on the research side, right? Because it could be anything, and sometimes it could be the simplest thing because you want to make sure it's explained properly, right? Because
Hmm.
it's almost we talked a little bit about this before we started the recording, but it's almost guaranteed that the one person that does know that you don't know what you're talking about or multiple, we'll read your book, and that will be part of the review. Obviously this author doesn't know,
100%.
but it's going to happen, right? So, you
Yeah.
know, you don't have to do, where some authors just there's hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of research and stuff, unless it's needed, right? So it doesn't always have to be that in depth, but you do want to
Right.
make sure at least you understand a working knowledge of things you're
Yeah.
bringing up, because you know you will get caught, unfortunately.
100%. And you just reminded me of a situation at my full-time job. I sometimes do copy for our website. So, and I have to get it right because, funnily enough, these people are fishermen and campers, and they know their stuff. So I wrote copy for this particular fishing line. Anyway, I know nothing about fishing whatsoever. And so I researched very thoroughly, and I still had to get it checked by like actual fishermen who work with us, and they were like, "Oh, if you write this, they'll string you up for this. Like you can't put this, like they'll know." So like it's quite daunting, like writing for an audience that knows their stuff.
Yeah.
Um, so yes, I definitely didn't want to make that mistake in my book, so I researched quite thoroughly those things just in case.
Yeah, and it's crazy because certain genres they're very passionate about, right? And you would think you have leverage because it is fantasy and it's your world you're building,
Right.
but they'll find something and they go, well, wait a minute, you said this happens on this planet. Why would this be?
Right.
You're like, oh man.
Damn it, I didn't even think about that. Yes,
Yeah.
it's so true. Like even the word, bedroom or toilet, like isn't widely used in those kinds of languages. So it's like, your chambers, your quarters, like, yeah, just things you don't really think of. But it's like, okay, you can't use that kind of language here, and people will pick it up, like you said.
They definitely
You can
will.
always count on that.
So, we had discussed a little bit about this before, but you mentioned this is going to be a trilogy.
Mhm.
Um, you know, are so some authors sometimes have already pre-written the trilogy and they release it as they go, re-edit. Is that something you've done, or are you writing it as you go?
So I have already written the second one. And I'd written most of the second before I had published the first. But for the third, I am currently going to start writing that very soon. So I don't think it was like, oh, I've got to do it this way. It just kind of happened that way, really.
Yeah.
Um, but yes, I do know people that have done like I'll write a whole trilogy and then like release them bit by bit, which in hindsight is quite smart because then you've got the material there already. You don't have to worry about it or people waiting for publication dates. Because right now, what I'm dealing with is people like, where is the book? It's like, it's coming, I promise. Yeah, so that's the only downside I can think of is it takes a bit more time, I guess, to get out there to readers who love your book.
Are you in the editing side of that, or for book two?
Yes. So I actually just got my editorial manuscript assessment back today from my editor. So I'm always a bit nervous opening those things because, it's critique and feedback and a bit scary, but no, it was all really good stuff. So I've got until I've got a few months where I can kind of work at that manuscript now and do all the edits and changes and then give it back to her for a final look over. So that's where I'm up to now. So things are moving, which is good.
Okay. Um, do you feel that this is a solid I'm not going to change it trilogy, or can you see it growing? Because a lot of times when you keep writing, organically the story grows itself, right? Do you
Mm,
feel that could be a possibility, or do you have it in your mind? I know exactly
mm,
what book two is, and I know what book three should be. So in
yeah.
theory, it should stop at the trilogy.
For me, I feel like I know exactly where I want to go. So I've got book 3 all plotted out. I know exactly what I want to happen. I just need to get there now. But in your point, I find when I write, I'm not writing my characters, they kind of control themselves. So if they're going
Yeah.
one way, I kind of just have to follow that and be like, well, I'm going on this journey now because it's
Yeah.
obviously, organically happening that way. So I'm very free flowing when I write in that respect. I've got my plot points and I know where I want to go, but in between, sometimes I will detour here and there depending on how the flow is and how my characters are organically going.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another author had mentioned, they said basically they're just taking dictation, right? It's just the story's
Literally, yes.
telling them and they're typing, right? That's all they're doing at that point. They're like,
Exactly.
okay, where are we going?
I'm just a voyeur in this. Like,
But
yeah.
again, it's I love that. I love that part of it when that story organically changes, right? Because
Hmm.
and I've said this, and again, I'm not saying I'm correct, but I feel sometimes when writers do get writer's block, it is forcing yourself to stay in that original structure and not letting sometimes that story, like you said, you're letting it organically grow. You're like, we're still
Mm,
going from point A to point B,
mm.
but I'll let you take any direction you want in between there to get yourself to B.
Exactly.
And I think sometimes when writers hold themselves to it has to be this straight line is
Mm,
sometimes when you might struggle because as you're writing it, the story may want to go and take that slight U-turn and then go back, and you forcing it is when you start struggling because that's not where the story is going, right? You're kind of forcing it
yeah,
into a structure it doesn't want to be in anymore.
that's so true. I've never really thought about it like that, but when I have got writer's block, I find it's just because I don't know which way to go to get to point B from point A. And it's just once I finally crack it and just let it go and just, not be so rigid with it, being
Yeah,
like, no, it has to be this way. Sometimes it's another way that works just as good, but you just haven't gotten there yet. And it's just, you got to just keep at it. Just write a sentence, write a couple of sentences. Doesn't matter if they're right or, you come back to it and you're like, what was I thinking? Like, as long as
yeah.
you get something
Just
down
get it
there and
out.
try and be, yeah, exactly. Try and knock down that wall because otherwise it'll just stay up forever.
Yeah. Yeah, as I keep doing this, I keep coming up with all these theories as I'm writing it
I
and
love it.
thinking of stuff. But another one I had was really, and as I've been doing these interviews and I ask the questions, and authors are telling me, I had a character that wasn't a big character, and all of a sudden now it's a main character, right? Or I had a
Mm,
character that was supposed to be maybe a chapter at best, still here, right? 12 chapters later, this character hasn't
right.
left, right? And there's so many authors that say that. It's just and like you said, sometimes you're just going with the flow and writing it.
Mm,
And the more I kept thinking about it, and again, I'm not saying I'm correct, but the more I kept thinking about it, I really saw the correlation between your story, right, and actual real life. And what I mean is
mm,
your characters that you're writing, right, in your story, they meet people, right? They meet individuals. They
yeah.
have experiences. They have interchanges between them. They have obstacles. They have challenges, right? And
Mm,
just like in real life, there's growth from those people, right? Somebody maybe you meet on the street or in the market was just meant to be met, but all of a sudden, you guys are hanging out now. You're friends, right? You guys are
right.
going doing stuff
Yeah.
together, and I feel that it's the same thing in the story because as you're writing it, right, you're in that mindset of the character, and like you said, it's like your baby, right? And you're taking that
Right.
character on their life journey, and as you're giving them people to meet, or characters to meet, or you're giving them something that's traumatic in the book or something that happened,
Mm,
like even a person in real life, there's growth, right?
right.
You would always hope positive growth, but there's growth one way or another, and your
Hmm.
life never stays on that straight line anymore. It maybe slightly curves. And I feel sometimes that's what the story wants to do because you're giving them experiences, challenges, meeting new people, and that
Hmm.
original maybe outline or plot that you originally gave that character is kind of thrown out the window for that reason because that
Yes.
interaction changed everything,
Yep.
right? And that's why sometimes the character was supposed to be a scene, and all of a sudden, 13 chapters later, you're like, this character never goes home, right?
You won't
Just
go
doesn't leave.
away. It's so true. And, I know you're saying you're not correct, but that's a pretty solid theory, if you ask me. I just, yeah, like the more you write the character, and like we were saying, it kind of takes a journey of its own. And sometimes that character's like, no, I need more screen time. So, the people are going to love me. So you kind of need to just follow that
Trust
journey.
me. Just trust me.
Just trust the process. Trust me here. Yeah. And it's like, oh, I didn't plan on this, but hey, let's go with it. And sometimes, it works out for the best, and obviously your characters know what you're doing. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
I
totally
mean, it's
agree.
crazy. Sometimes, almost always, it's better than than what you kind of had
I
planned
know.
when you let it kind of grow, right? It's just
Yeah.
very interesting how that works.
I know, I know. It's like, wow, I should really trust myself a lot more often.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So you have, again, you have the trilogy, right? And as of right now, it's a solid trilogy, right? It,
Mhm.
it's knocking out there.
Yeah.
Do you feel like future things you would write may not be, say, the same storyline, but do you feel
Mhm.
maybe you may use that world or aspects of the world or worlds in future stories where it doesn't necessarily have to be the same characters
Mm.
or even the same timeline, right? I mean, very similar
Mhm.
to, the Star Wars universe where you have all these different things and they're just all different timelines. It's one world, but not necessarily
Right.
chronologically or not necessarily joined, right?
Mm.
Marvel universe, DC universe. So you have all these things where there's just a world in the back. And
Yes.
because you've done all this work, you've done all this to build these worlds. Do you ever think that you may do that, or do you feel on your next project you're like, okay, I'm starting from scratch and I'm doing this again?
I think both. I think I I'm really I don't want to say bad, but I'm just terrible with writing down so many book ideas that I just don't have time to write. So I've got lots of those.
Yeah,
Not necessarily in the fantasy genre, some are different. But yes, different worlds, different stories altogether. But in saying that, I have really thought about possibly doing like a prologue type thing back to when the Dark War was. So in my book, there's a Dark War that happens about 25 years ago from when the current story is set. And I just think it would be so cool to go back to that and all the characters that were in that. And like there's some characters in this book that are still from that when that happened, but just to kind of flesh that out and just, I talk about it in this book, but just exactly how that went down and all the characters, some new, some old, to kind of expand on that and just add, like, flesh out for my story too, just to give that correlation between the two. Like, okay, this is what happened with the Dark War and everything that went down. So obviously, I don't want this book to be just about that. Like, it talks about it and mentions it and references points from it, but it's not all about that. It's just like a throwback, a callback.
yeah,
But it'd be really cool to do a book just based on what happened and why the world is the way it is today.
yeah. That would be interesting. I mean, it's similar to Star Wars did that with the Clone Wars. Always talked about it, and then they went back and actually, showed you what they
Yes,
were. So it's always a
exactly.
good thing to build out, continually build out that world and really give them all those little aspects of why it is like it is, right? Why all that stuff
Right.
happened.
Yes, exactly. Like I love The Mandalorian, like the spin-offs, like I just love how they use the same world but just different
Yeah,
character focus and yeah, I'm a big fan of that. So Star Wars
yeah,
does it very well.
yeah. You touched a little bit on another question I have, which I was going to actually ask you, is other genres, right? So you mentioned you have some stories and possibly not fantasy, what
Mhm.
other genres would you like to attempt? I know you said you had done some sci-fi stuff before and love sci-fi. Would that
Mhm.
be one of the genres, or is there another one you're thinking of trying?
Definitely sci-fi. So I have an idea for a sci-fi novel if I ever get around to writing it. And then I also I'd love to write a romance and a sports romance. So I have those on my list as well. Um, and I think that's it. Like romance, sports romance, and sci-fi, and another fantasy I have in mind too. So just all of the things.
That's that's the way it works, isn't it? This whole list. Sometimes the idea list is bigger than the TBRs usually.
Oh, mine really is. I wouldn't even want to show you. It's bad. But
You know,
hey, plenty of ideas.
yep. This has been great, Stephanie. I really enjoyed you coming on the show today, talk about your work, talk about you, right? Getting to meet you like this. Um, I do want to remind the viewers that I will have all your links down below in the description of the video. So, websites, links to the book, socials, anything you want to share, that will be down below.
Mhm.
You said your book is possibly summer when it's coming out, the book two.
Yes. So I think we're the opposite, aren't we? So it'll be winter for me in Australia
Yeah.
and summer for you guys. So yes, looking. Spoiler alert: that June, July release.
Okay. I
Yeah.
think I think you are because we're pre-recording this right now. I think you are probably going to be somewhere in May that this will air.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll be getting close to your release. So, we'll try to do some stuff so you'll have some stuff to be able to use for the release,
Oh,
you know,
awesome.
and different things on that side.
Yes.
Again, viewers, if you guys have any comments, please leave them below. If you have any questions for either Stephanie or myself, we'd love to read them and answer them for you. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notifications so you don't miss all these amazing authors that I have coming up. Thank you again, Stephanie, for coming on. I really did enjoy this.
Thank you so much for having me. You're doing God's work. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, viewers, for watching as well. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Hold on.